Welcome back to the Tulsa World Sports Extra Show. I'm your host, Jawan Lee, joined today by columnist Barry Trammell and Bill Haston, and also sports editor Barry Lewis. Special shout out to Patrick Prince for filling in for me during my week off and vacation. Did an excellent job as usual. I hope you guys are okay with me slotting back in the host position, but we have a great sports show for you today. We'll start off in the high schools football atmosphere. Big news Tuesday. Shaker Reisig decommitted from Boston College. Well, decommitted from Utah, I'm sorry, and is headed to Boston College. So I want to get Barry Lewis's opinions on that and how everything shakes out with that.
Yeah, Shaker, of course, one of the best quarterbacks in the state, if not the best, from Union, who started his career at Jenks, winning a state championship as a freshman. I was not really surprised when he decommitted from Utah because, well, I'm not surprised when any student athlete decommits these days. I think even before the NIL situation really blew up, that it was really whenever someone gave a commitment, especially so far out from the signing date, 6 to 9 months, I think it's about a 50% chance that that commitment was going to change sometimes between then and the signing date. And now you've got the NIL situation, and it's probably that's percentage is going to increase. Shaker in Utah just seemed like an unusual fit. Not that I would have ever guessed he was going to wind up at Boston College, but it does seem like it could be a really interesting and good situation for him, as he's going to be playing for Bill O'Brien, the former Houston Texans coach, who, of course, was the Patriots offensive coordinator last year. Boston College had been really more run-oriented before Bill O'Brien arrived. Now they're going to be passing more. So that's going to be really interesting to see if Shaker holds on to that commitment at Boston College. Again, the odds would seem to say probably not, but who knows?
If Shaker, I think Barry Lewis will agree with me. If Shaker Rising were 6'4" instead of 6 foot or 6'1", he would have offers from everybody, literally like Ohio State, Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley, Alabama, Georgia, etc. I think that highly of his arm talent. He's the most talented. Barry Trammell, he's the most talented high school quarterback with regard to his ability to use the entire field and to spin the ball and then to go from touch to a fastball to deep ball. I mean, he's the best I've ever seen in high school football. So I'm not surprised at all. I will say this, and I wrote it yesterday for today's Tulsa World, but I really believed for quite about a year or so that he would end up somehow at OSU. I really did, because I know OSU liked him, and he had been over there for some camps, and I just felt like he would end up playing for Mike Gundy. And then you have the Utah commit and the decommit, and now the Boston College commit. So, and I wrote also today, a lot can happen in 5 months, and that these other schools are not going to lay down and capitulate just because there's a commitment to BC, because obviously BC didn't quit on the process when he committed to Utah. So I think we'll see. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around Boston College being in the ACC. But it's just so prevalent now, these commitment flips, Barry Trammell, that nothing surprises me anymore. And if it happens twice more between now and December, it won't shock me.
Well, Bill, if you're still sort of trying to wrap your arms around Boston College being in the ACC, you're going to have to lie down. I've got some sobering news for you about Stanford and Cal Berkeley.
Right.
But Boston College, to me, is the interesting part of this rising story. I mean, Boston College. I mean, Bill O'Brien was a great hire for BC, no doubt about it. He brings some cachet, a lot of credibility. Their recruiting profile really goes up. But if you tell me that a kid from Tulsa is highly recruited in this part of the country by a lot of people, and he decommits from Utah, and you want me to pick where he's going to go, I'd have Boston College somewhere after this top 75. So to me, this is a great story about BC. And this is a school that really needs to increase its profile, and apparently it has.
Sticking on the college football level, Tram, you wrote a column today about the Big 12 possibly getting into sponsorship deals as far as their naming, the conference naming rights. That seems to be a big rift on, social media right now. But I want to ask you, far as corporate sponsorships, would that bother you with branding deals, and does that affect college football tradition any?
Well, of course, it kills college football tradition because, I mean, next thing you'll know, if we keep going down this road, the next thing you know, OU and OSU won't be playing in football, and they'll be in separate conferences, and Stanford and Cal will be in the ACC. So, listen, we can't worry about tradition. That's gone with the wind. I think this is a story that doesn't set well with us. But listen, all we have to do is think it through, and we realize this is just the natural progression. The Big 12 needs more money. Here's a way to get it. And guess what? The Big 12 name was not all that great anyway. First of all, there hasn't been 12 teams in this conference since 2010. That was 14 years ago. Also, the Big 12 reputation is tarnished. Lots of reports of the death of the conference. The status of the conference has been crippled. This is a league that could use a rebrand. The Big 12 name is not what it used to be. So if you're going to pick a corporate name, All-State 12, not great, but you could do a lot worse. Personally, I'd hold out for Wells Fargo. You talk about a coast-to-coast conference, sign me up for Wells Fargo. But no, it doesn't bother me. You got to have money. You got to generate money. Brett Yormark was hired as commissioner to generate money, selling the conference name, perhaps for $50 million, or I'm sorry, $500 million over 10 years. That'll do it. I can't gripe about this decision.
No, I have no issue with that because it's not just the Big 12, Barry. There have been other leagues that have had a big number attached to the Big 10, and there aren't 10 teams. I mean, those conference names are obsolete. So, as long as it's not something ridiculous, I mean, I'm cool with it because, first of all, like Barry said, college football tradition, the old template, the old traditions are mostly gone. But with this new revenue stream, would it help save sports like wrestling, baseball, and track at the scholarship level? Probably. So I'm all for it. I mean, let's do it. Everything else is changing. And this will take me 15 minutes to get used to. I mean, I like it. Nobody may like it in the beginning, but how long did it take you guys to get used to seeing corporate patches on jerseys? About 15 minutes, and then you either notice it, you don't think about it, or you don't even notice it anymore. So yeah, I have no issue with it. It's the way the way they're going to have to go to develop an additional revenue stream to save these other sports, these non-revenue sports.
Yeah, if there's ever a time to do this, now seems to be the time. The only two conferences it would really bother me to have their names changed would be the SEC, because it's still a pretty applicable, appropriate name for the conference, and the Ivy League. Just if the Ivy League sells out, well, maybe all is lost at that point.
Moving over to baseball, at the time of recording, June 19th, it was yesterday that baseball legend Willie Mays passed away. A little bit before my time, but I'm pretty sure these guys have some fond memories of Willie Mays. Barry, I'll start with you. Barry Lewis, I'll start with you about Willie Mays.
Well, some personal Willie Mays memories. And again, I got in on his career. I started following baseball towards the latter part of his career, so I missed his prime years. But my first Willie Mays memory was I was on a vacation and bought a figurine, the first baseball player figurines I ever bought. Was in a store in Michigan, and bought my mom bought for me a Willie Mays, Lou Brock, and a Tim McCarver. And when we got home to Tulsa, I showed them to my dad, who's a big Willie Mays fan. And somehow on the way home, we lost the cap for Willie Mays. And my dad thought, well, that's appropriate because he's always Willie Mays is always losing his cap when
Right.
he goes to make catches. So I thought that was pretty cool. And everyone talks about his Polo Grounds catch in the 1954 World Series. Of course, great play. Everyone's seen that. Of course, that was way before my time. But the catch and the play, the moment that stands out most for me with Willie Mays was on the first Saturday afternoon NBC Game of the Week game from the 1970 season. Ironically, that was the day the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission blasted off. But in baseball that day, the Giants were playing the Reds at Candlestick Park. And this was at a time I hadn't really had a chance because the Giants weren't they weren't on TV all the time. Very like most teams, if you weren't in a major league market, you didn't get to see a lot of games. So this was a rare chance to see Willie Mays. And early in the game, the Reds' Bobby Tolan hits a drive. It looks like could be a home run. Willie Mays races up against the chain link fence. And he's 38, almost 39 at the time. He soars in the air, collides with the right fielder, Bobby Bonds, and pulls the ball down, saving a home run as they wind up all tangled up. Just a sensational, underrated catch and great play from Willie Mays' career. So those are the two Willie Mays moments that stand out to me.
That's one of the most fearless catches I've ever seen, Barry. And thank goodness that fence was pliable, right? Or both guys would have been in the hospital. I mean, it was a violent collision. It was probably the most violent collision I've ever seen where the catch was actually made. But Willie Mays, I think I mentioned to you guys when we were chatting before the show that my favorite team sport athlete ever is Michael Jordan, and my number 2 guy is Willie Mays, and he's my favorite baseball guy ahead of Adrian Beltre. And I grew up reading Willie Mays books like Barry. His prime years preceded me and Barry Lewis's or all of our abilities to watch and understand baseball. But I guess what really strikes me about Willie's offensive numbers is that he hit 660 home runs, and he was number 2 until he was passed by. He was number 2 behind Babe Ruth for a long time until he was passed by Henry Aaron. And then, but you think about the garbage ballparks he played in, the Polo Grounds, where unless you hit it right down the line, either way, it was 480 feet to dead center field at Polo Grounds. And then he played at Candlestick where, the air was just terrible and the ball didn't travel well. And he had 600, he would have had an additional 100 home runs, Barry, if he'd have played in a more home run friendly park easily, I would think, considering the length of his career. And I would say too, to anybody who's younger who wants something more relatable to today, I would just say Willie Mays, if he were 24 years old today, he would be destined to become the first $1 billion team sport athlete. It'd be Willie Mays. Because if you think Shohei Ohtani's great, and he is, but Willie Mays was the greatest player of all time. Not the greatest outfielder, not the greatest center fielder. He's the best baseball player who's ever lived.
When I think of Willie Mays, I think back to July 12th, 1970. I was 9 years old. My dad and mom took me and my brothers to the Astrodome. We got to see the Giants play the Astros. Willie Mays had 2 hits that night, got up to 2,998 hits. For crying out loud, I missed his 3,000th hit by 2 little hits. So when I was 9 years old in Central Oklahoma, 1970, Willie Mays still was a magic name. And growing up, Mickey Mantle retired after the 68 season. I was following baseball on a limited scale, but the 2 names you knew were Mickey Mantle and Willie Mays. Mays kept playing a few years. He wasn't the same Willie Mays, but you knew he was still one of the all-time greats. Barry Lewis talked about the catch of Vic Wertz in 1954. You've seen it across social media, multiple times the last day or so. That catch was 70 years ago, and it's still an iconic play going into the deep well of the Polo Grounds that Bill's talking about. So, yeah, baseball no longer really captures our imagination. It doesn't capture our fantasy, the way it does. It did 40 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years ago. There's really not a comparison to Willie Mays when you talk about modern ball players. The game is played different. It's covered different. It's viewed differently by the fans. But let me promise you, there was a time when Willie Mays had the complete attention of American sports.
You know what? I will agree with you, Tram, about the magic around his name. Of course, I didn't get to see Willie Mays play, but when you hear that name, you think about him being a historical figure. There's a certain aura around when you say the name Willie Mays. So I appreciate you guys sharing your memories of him for sure. But moving on to our rapid fire segment, we'll start with Bill Haston. He did a Mike Gundy series this past week, kind of going back through his 19 years of coaching Oklahoma State. Interesting question I came up with. If you had to choose one of those 19 players that you put on your list, offense and defense, who would make the greatest impact on this year's Cowboys team?
Well, I mean, this is an easy question for me because, or I think for anybody who really has followed Oklahoma State in the Gundy era, it would be Brandon Weeden, Jawan, because he was the best quarterback in the history of the school, most arm talent in the history of the school. He was an older guy who played minor league baseball in the Yankees system and a little bit for the Dodgers. So he came into OSU as a freshman at age 23 or 24, right? As a freshman. Waited 3 years. He was like 26 when he got the starting job. Much older guy, a very mature guy. So you add the leadership plus the talent. And OSU throughout these Gundy years has had a knack. They just keep having wide receivers. They always have good wide receivers, either great ones or really good ones. And good enough running backs in some year or most years and great ones in some years. You put Brandon Weeden with this team this year and it transforms this team into, for sure a playoff team and maybe a playoff semifinalist kind of a team. But it'd be Brandon Weeden.
What about on defense?
Oh, baby. Probably Emmanuel Agba because of his, who has gone on to have a nice NFL career, but because of his disrupt, although really the popular answer should be Malcolm Rodriguez because of his ability to cover and tackle. And I love Emmanuel, and now I'm changing my answer midstream. Emmanuel Agba is the best disruption guy with regard to the pass rush. But I would say, yeah, it's got to be Malcolm Rodriguez because he could do everything, and he did do everything, and he never got hurt, and he made 400 tackles at 5'10" tall, whatever he is, and he's the greatest defensive player Gundy's had. So it would be Malcolm.
Tram, for you, OU softball coming off their fourth consecutive national championship. We don't know how realistic this could possibly be, but with Stanford star Najari Kennedy, who just entered the transfer portal, if OU was able to obtain her, would that guarantee a fifth national championship?
Well, it doesn't guarantee, but I certainly tell you it puts the Sooners back in the driver's seat. Patty Gasso faces a massive rebuilding job, 3 position players returning, losing their top 2 pitchers. It's a huge, huge transition year for Patty. Going into the SEC, Oklahoma might still be the favorite just because of the name, but not assured that they would be in position to win number 5 in a row. But you put Kennedy on this team, the nation's best pitcher, everything changes. At the core of softball, a big-time pitcher still is Herculean, still commands the total game. You put Kennedy on this team, you don't have to score 7 runs a game. You put Kennedy on this team, Sooners are back in the driver's seat to win the Women's College World Series. And most of the college softball world believes she is coming to OU. I don't have any idea, but I can tell you, those that are tired of the Sooner domination fear this transfer. They fear that Kennedy's going to end up at OU and put the Sooners back at number 1.
Barry Lewis is All World Week. We have the All World Awards June 20th, Thursday. Give me your favorite All World Award moment.
It's really hard to pick just one. A couple that stand out was really special speech that Jenks football coach Alan Trimble gave in 2017 as the first Lifetime Achievement Award winner. That was about a year after he had been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. So that was a special moment. I believe it was 2018, maybe 2019. We used to do a pregame show, so to speak, before, and where we would interview several of the student athletes and those attending. And in the middle of the show, someone came up to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in talking with Blake Jarwin, the former OSU tight end?" And then was about to start. This was just like a few days before he was going to start a second preseason camp with the Dallas Cowboys. I'm thinking, and this was like totally out of nowhere. It's like, yes, anytime a Dallas Cowboy is at the All World Awards and he's volunteering, we didn't have to ask him. They're volunteering for him to be on our show. I said, yes, super. And so Blake Jarwin appeared on our pregame show, and he was great. And then he wound up having a breakout type season for the Cowboys that year. So that was definitely a fun memory.
All right, that was our rapid fire segment. Moving on to our parting shots. We'll start with Bill. What do you want to leave our audience with for this week?
So I was gauging the Tulsa afternoon temperatures each day during the U.S. Open last week, right? Because I know that Southern Hills would like to have another U.S. Open and would certainly like to have another PGA Championship. One's as good as the other with regard to prestige, or maybe the U.S. Open in some people's minds is greater with regard to prestige. But all I know is that the 4 days of the U.S. Open last week in Tulsa, it was 93 degrees, 93 degrees, 94 degrees, 96 degrees. And when we hosted the PGA Championship 2 years ago, the temperature was in the 60s. And in the morning round, early mornings, during the morning rounds, people were wearing jackets. Barry Lewis remembers that. So I'm just, I don't get a vote. This is a Southern Hills club matter. It's their call. It's their club. But I would love to see the next available PGA Championship is 2032. And I'm very hopeful that Tulsa, Oklahoma scores that tournament as its next major, which would be the 9th at Southern Hills.
Tram.
Well, for this week in the Sunday World, I ranked all 128 SEC football games for the 2024 season. I did not have a Sooner game in the top 5. That's because Oklahoma is not considered to be a contender for the SEC championship. But then came in the next 16 slots, 6 OU games. Sooners could be a spoiler in places like Columbia, Missouri, and Oxford, Mississippi, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana, plus Alabama and Tennessee coming to Norman. But the great thing about the Sooner schedule is this. That kind of schedule is very difficult, but it's also great opportunity. The Sooners could play their way out of spoiler role and into contention role. And if the Sooners can produce a great record against that schedule, they're going to be highly seeded in the 12-team playoffs. So to whom much is expected, much is required. Not a lot is expected out of these Sooners, but they could really produce and give you a great season, inaugural in the SEC. It's going to be a fun fall of football.
And my parting shot is Tony Dillingham is leaving Jenks after 22 years as the Trojans athletic director to take the athletic director's job in Arkansas at Bentonville West, a fairly new school, growing school, and the largest classification there. It gives him an opportunity to take Oklahoma retirement, teachers retirement, and also work in Arkansas, a new chapter, a new challenge for him. The past 22 years, he's overseen 98 state championships. As he would say, got to give all the credit to the athletes and coaches. He just did his best to try to facilitate for them to be able to do what they do, and he did it very well. He was always very helpful to us. And so want to wish the best to Tony Dillingham in his new job in Bentonville.
All right. This has been another great show for Barry Trammell, Bill Haston, Barry Lewis. I'm your host, Jawan Lee. This has been the Tulsa World Sports Extra Show. We'll see you guys next week.